And thanks to everybody who's here in person and online. Yes, I picked a topic, a title. Let's talk about relationships. And then I realized, that everything's okay? And then I realized that I had picked a topic that was way bigger than one talk. Because relationships are life. And there are so many of them. We have relationships with one another, with family, with friends, with communities, with neighborhoods, with nations, with animals. It just goes on and on and on. I'm not sure that even a hermit who's living in the mountains doesn't have relationships. Maybe a relationship to the earth, to the cave that he or she lives in, to the people in the village that bring them food. Relationships are just part of life. They are life, I think. And so as I considered relationships, I thought perhaps it would be better to connect it to what actually we're experiencing now, which is all these holidays or these celebrations. It's like we have kind of a trifecta of things to celebrate. There's Father's Day, of course, which is today. There's the whole month of June, which is Pride Month. And then there's Juneteenth, which will officially be celebrated tomorrow, but there have already been celebrations and observances of Juneteenth. So I would like to talk about each of those things and tie in a little bit about the life of the Buddha and Thai's life and how maybe they relate to each of these celebrations or each of these observations. So let me start with Father's Day. That's perhaps why so few people are here today, which is great if they're celebrating their dads. I know there are some people, maybe even some of you, that actually never knew your father, maybe not even know who your father was. But the fact is that none of us would be here without a father. Just in the same way, none of us would be here without a mother. So even though we don't perhaps know our biological parents, they were necessary for our manifestation, for us to be here. And there is a long, long line of fathers in your personal history. And you're a continuation of all of them. So that's something we can be grateful for, I think, today, even if there was not a good relationship with your biological father, if you didn't know him, whatever the cause is behind that, still, fathers are essential. And this long line of fathers in your history are something that I think we can be grateful for. Thinking about that as it moves back in time. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh never was a father, but he was a father figure to hundreds, maybe thousands of people. I think when he started out as a young man, a young monk, most of the followers were people almost his same age. And so I doubt that they thought of him as a father figure, but they certainly thought of him as a mentor, as a guide. And then later, as he just developed monasteries and started ordaining monks and nuns, I know many of them thought of him as a father figure, and they talk about it. They talk about him like that. They have a great reverence for him. Thai talked lovingly about his father, and he talked about other father figures in his life. So he's a pretty good example of how to how to think about fathers. The Buddha is a kind of a different story, because when he was a young man, he grew up in what in those days was just like the lap of luxury. And he had everything he wanted, everything he needed. But he had a longing in his heart. A.H. almost says, longing is a messenger from the heart. And so, because of some experiences that Buddha, he wasn't the Buddha then, he was Shakyamuni, or no, he was Siddhartha, sorry. Because of some experiences he had where he saw people suffering, he saw somebody being cremated, and he knew from those experiences that his life was different from theirs, and that people actually suffered. And I'm kind of extrapolating here, but I imagine that he thought and wondered, why do people suffer? And how can we alleviate that? And he just must have thought about that for quite some time, when he finally just could not resist the longing to go out from his place of comfort and find some way, some teaching, some way that would show him how to help relieve suffering in the world. And so he left his wife and his baby. So, you know, he was a father who abandoned his family. And he went in search of teachers who could show him what he wanted to know. He was seeking. He did this for a number of years. And he would, each time he met a new teacher, he would kind of rise rapidly and knew what they were teaching so quickly that many of them said, why don't you teach now? And he was never satisfied that what he had learned was exactly what he was looking for. And so he tried a lot of different things, and eventually actually almost killed himself because he was observing this incredibly strict diet, eating just plants that he found in the forest, eating very little. So he was essentially starving when a young girl found him under a tree, and she gave him some milk because she thought he was starving, dying. It was after that experience that Siddhartha decided that he was not going to find what he's looking for outside in all of these other places and in these other teachers. And somehow he knew that the answers were within him. And so he went to a place where he was comfortable. He sat under a tree, and he promised himself that he was not going to get up until he had realized what it was he was looking for. And sure enough, eventually he did. We don't know how long he sat under the tree, but I hope it wasn't very long. And he realized that suffering is a part of our human experience, but it's also something that we can learn to manage. We can't avoid it. We can't deny it, but we can learn how to manage it. We can learn how to suffer less. And so after that, he went on his way to teach what he had learned. Now, the thing is that once he started collecting followers and then ordaining monks, his son, whose name was Rahul, went to him and said he wanted to become a monk. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. His mother actually also became a nun later on. That's another story. Because when they first petitioned, a group of women came to where the monk was, or where Buddha was camping, and they asked to be ordained, and he said, can't do it. Sorry. So they appealed to one of the Buddha's disciples. His name was Ananda, and they reasoned with him. They said, because the Buddha had already said that women were capable of achieving enlightenment, and that was a radical position at the time. So they said, the Buddha has already said that women are able to achieve enlightenment, so why can we not be ordained as nuns? And Ananda went to the Buddha with that argument, and there was nothing wrong with that argument. And so the Buddha conceded, and he ordained the women that had come. So the point of telling you all of that is that even though Siddhartha left his family, he never lost contact with them. And apparently they continued to have a good relationship because they came to him to join his community. There may be other things I want to say about that, but I'm going to leave it for now and ask Alex to ring a bell so that we can just breathe and kind of let go of these thoughts, processing thoughts of Father. And I'll invite you to just think about not only your Father, but just the energy of Father, and what that might mean to you. So in the month of June, we are also celebrating Pride Month. There have been lots of parades and parties and private gatherings to celebrate Pride Month, but there has also been a noticeable shift in the acceptance of the LGBT community and our friends. We see that happening in laws that have been enacted recently. We see it in the way that LGBTQ people are treated in the marketplace even. And so even though we celebrate it, we also have to recognize that there has been a real shift in the way that our friends are being treated and not really honored and respected. Anna sent some of us an article about a community at Sangha. It's called Arise. And there's some really great stuff in this, this article that Anna sent us. So I would like to share some of that with you. What they say is that Pride Month is a celebration rooted in movement towards collective liberation, which is very much what the Buddha was moving toward, a sense of collective liberation, liberating ourselves from our suffering. The Arise website describes themselves as a community of mindfulness practitioners and monastics who come together to heal the wounds of racial injustice and social inequity, beginning with looking deeply within ourselves and using the energy of compassion, understanding, and love in action. I encourage you to check out their website, which is simply arisesangha.org. Now, you might have recognized, if you're familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness trainings, you might have recognized some of the wording in here that sounds a lot like one of the, well, several actually, of the 5 mindfulness trainings that we recite. The energy of compassion, understanding, and love. All of that is very much in alignment with what Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, and is obviously also in alignment with what the Buddha taught us. The Buddha in his time did not discriminate against those who wanted to become a part of his community, nor one of his monks. I'm sure, I know they had precepts they were expected to abide by, but he didn't turn anybody away because of their ethnicity, their origin, their class. So this is a continuation of the Buddha's energy, of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, to develop in this Sangha the energy of compassion, understanding, and love. There is, in the 5 mindfulness trainings that we recite every month in the Interbeing Sangha, there is well, all of the precepts, all of the mindfulness trainings say something about love and compassion. But the one that speaks to me more clearly about this is the one that's called loving speech and deep listening. I'll just read a little bit of it. It starts, aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups and nations. And he goes on to say how we might do that. Of course, loving speech and deep listening is the root of it. The mindfulness trainings that Cornell and I took when we received the 14 mindfulness trainings, when we were ordained into the Order of Interbeing, also has similar trainings. And it also has one called Loving Speech and Deep Listening. But the one that I think is more in alignment with what I'm talking about is the 8th one, which says it's called True Community and Communication. And I'll just read a little bit of this one. Aware that lack of communication always brings separation and suffering, we are committed to training ourselves in the practice of compassionate listening and loving speech, knowing that true community is rooted in inclusiveness and in the concrete practice of harmony of views, thinking, and speech. We will practice to share our understanding and experiences with members in our community in order to arrive at a collective insight. All of these trainings, all of these precepts are based on the Buddha's teachings. I do want to read one more thing for you from the Arise Sangha website. This is very similar to the precepts I've been reading to you, but this one is a little more specific because it addresses social inequities a little more than those did. But it starts with aware of the suffering. And this one is kind of long, but hang in there. Aware of the suffering caused by racial, systemic, and social inequities, we commit ourselves individually and as a community to understanding the roots of these inequities and to transforming this suffering into compassion, understanding, and love in action. As a global community of practitioners, we are aware of the disproportionate racial violence and oppression committed by institutions and by individuals, whether consciously or unconsciously, against African Americans, Indigenous people, and people of color across the United States and beyond. We know that by looking deeply as individuals and as a community, we can engage in the collective wisdom and energy of the Sangha to be our foundation for right thought, right speech, right action, right mindfulness, and right insight. These are the practices leading to non-discrimination, non-harming, and non-self, which heal ourselves and the world. Let's take a breath. So tomorrow is June the 19th, which is the official holiday or official day of Juneteenth. I don't know if you know the history of Juneteenth, but it's very interesting and you might want to look it up. I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights. So it commemorates June 19th of 1865, when 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to announce that President Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which granted freedom to enslaved people. He did that. The president signed that proclamation in 1862, the end of 1862. It became official on January 1st, 1863. And the people in Galveston and other parts of the South that had been Confederate, they learned about it in 1865, so almost 3 years later. The first actual celebration was done on July the 19th in 1866. So the problem with this is it wasn't that easy, as we all know. It was not that easy to just say all the slaves are free, because there was still so much violence, hatred, fear around the emancipation, that it took years and years and years for things to get even a little bit better. And still, in our society, we are still reaping the terrible, fallout from the fact that there were slaves in our country. There's a woman in Dallas. Her name is Opal Lee, Miss Opal Lee. She's called the grandmother of Juneteenth, because she has fought for years to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And finally, I think it was just last year, or maybe it was 21, that President Biden made it official. He made Juneteenth an official holiday. In this same Arise, sorry, kind of lost the word there. When I was looking at the Arise website, there's an excellent article by Valerie Brown, who wrote about all of the aftermath of what happened after the slaves were freed, tracing the history of Juneteenth and the what was supposed to be the reconciliation and the restructuring of the government after that. So what I know from the Buddha's life and from Thich Nhat Hanh's life is that neither of them discriminated in any way. They welcomed anyone, everyone to the table. And even though both of them suffered from lies, people who were kind of hostile to them, they still never shifted their way of being. They continue to be non-discriminate. I'm trying to think how I want to say what's actually in my heart. Sometimes things that are in one's heart are a little hard to put into words because it's more like a feeling. And so I guess I'll just say how I'm feeling. When I look at all of the things that are happening in the world now, I get disheartened. I get worried. I get concerned about the people that I love. Sorry, I did not expect to get teary. Because it seems that much of the progress that we thought we had made is now being dismantled. Much of the progress that we thought we had made in the LGBT community, and then with people of color, with women, much of those things are being, if not totally dismantled, then really shoved back into another decade or two. And so I'm concerned. I know that everything's impermanent. I know that. And so it makes sense that the progress we had made was not permanent. And it also makes sense that the things that are happening now are not permanent. But in the meantime, it's hard. It's hard to deal with it. And so what I do, the only thing that I have been able to do is be sure that I am that I am living my life in a way that is loving, compassionate, kind. And I'm hoping that that example will kind of radiate out into the community, out into people I know, I'm hoping also that I will have the courage to stand up for these things, to let people know when they have said things that I object to, or things that I have a different opinion about. So it's very personal to me, as you can tell. And I'm hoping that also that perhaps you have had some practices that have been helpful to you, and perhaps you would share that with us. There are many, many, many things in Thai's readings, in Thai's books, many things in the Buddhist sutras, even this Bodhisattva vow that I read to you from Shantideva, who wrote in the 8th century. Apparently, even in those times, there were people without protection. There were people who had lost their way. There were people who were searching for ways to find themselves and get out of danger. He just goes on and on. And so I have this little thing on my desk, and I read it often, not every day, but I read it often. And it reminds me of what I long to do. I think also, I think also a part of this feeling is what's happening as I age, because I start to realize that I have not as much time as I used to have to make any changes, to have an impact. I'm really kind of glad it's a small group today. Anyway, so that's basically all I wanted to say. And thank you for listening and putting up with my tears.